Once again, let me emphasize that this is the discussion with witnesses of the crimes. And keeping in mind our today's goal, this is yet another way to recall and think about the things that were mentioned by Kalinda in this stage. Every crime should be punished. We have no right to forget about any of the crimes. So we are here to listen to the stories and once again understand the scope of the tragedy that was happening here in Kiev and all around Ukraine. So, Katerina, you have evacuated from Bucha 3 times. Katrina has survived terrible injuries. Her car was shot at while she tried to evacuate with her child. So a couple of days before the full-scale invasion, you came to Bucha to be safer, right? To feel safer in these suburbs of Kiev. You were not alone in this, and many people thought it would be safer outside of Kiev. People want to see their friends and family and stay with them, and this is exactly what happened to Katerina. So, Katerina, what happened next? Hello, everyone. So, on the 25th of February last year, I understood that I had to go back to Kiev because it was so loud. I could hear explosions, and it was Hostomel airport. My 3-year-old son was with me, and I understood it was quite a difficult situation. We had no food. We couldn't go shopping because it was dangerous. And so I decided to try and check if I could cross a Hostomel bridge and travel to Kiev with my son. In the beginning, I thought I would go with my boy, but then I decided I need to test this on my own. And it was the right decision because I saw cars burning. I understood it would be very dangerous to go there with my son. So on my way back, I made a stop at the crossroads. There are roads to Bucha, Hostomel, and Irpin, and after I crossed that crossroads, I saw a car aside the road, and there was some man beside it. I'm a doctor, so I stopped and asked him if I could be of some use, and that's when the started the shelling, and I moved forward slightly towards the forest. Then I crossed my head with my arms, and I just waited for all this to stop. So it was later found out that in that car there were 153 holes. Yes, so we will see the child's chair, and this is a proof that it surely would be a mistake if you wanted to evacuate with your son back then. Yes, so it's good I didn't take the son with me. So after your 3 attempts to evacuate, what happened next? Next, was I was brought by the ambulance to the hospital, and actually it was very unsafe. So in the beginning, the ambulance didn't want to go there, but after my parents and my friends supported the cause, the ambulance came, and me, as well as some other people, were brought to Bucha's hospital. I saw people with terrible injuries, and I thought I was doing much better. So the X-ray showed that I had multiple injuries of chest and the right shoulder, and some of the pieces of shrapnel were pulled out, some were still left. So I went on foot to see my child again. So I was scared, but I understood that I needed to go back to my son. So for a couple of days I was feeling pain. I had difficulty sleeping. I only had the minimum store of the painkillers. So I understood that we needed to move forward somewhere, and with my colleague, with my son, I decided to move to a place we were advised to go, but it was difficult. It was a small child, and the child is still quite heavy, and it was very heavy to me to carry the child in my arms. So there were explosions. We were going through the forest. The child was crying and didn't listen to my advice to keep silence. And at some point we decided to go back because, well, it was a long way and I had to carry my son. So on the 28th, my friends, two guys, came to take me with them on foot. They left their car on the other side. They were risking their lives, and they told us they would take us with them. But we didn't want to go. We were so frightened. But I pulled myself together and I understood that these people were risking their lives to come and get us, and I just couldn't refuse. It would be a very unwise thing to do, and we needed to risk then because otherwise no one else would come to save us. And we went there to cross the bridge. Yeah, thanks to your friends, you are able to be here today and your son is doing good. How did you explain these events to your son, and how can one explain such things to a child, and how can one rehabilitate the child afterwards, because your son has seen terrible things?
To be honest, I was trying to make sure that he was looking at it as if at a movie. When we were crossing the bridge, there were cars on fire, there were people on fire, service members on fire. There was a lot of smoke and dirt and dust and shrapnel. We carried him, and he was asking me, "Why are those men burning?" And I said, "Those are not men, they're just mannequins. There's a movie being filmed here." When we were passing the bridge and saw this huge hole in the bridge because it has been blown up, he asked me, "Mom, why there's this hole in the bridge?" And I told him, "Oh, that's because the lightning struck. The lightning can strike a bridge and then there will be a hole. Why is it so dirty here?" "Well, because they're filming a movie." So I was doing my best to distract him and try to tell him that the movie is being filmed here and we will just run quickly through the scene, and we're also being filmed. And he asked me a couple of times, "When will the movie come out?" And I said, "Baby, I hope we will never watch this movie ever again." Having passed the bridge, we were being picked up by the vehicle on the other side of the bridge. We got into the car, and for an hour I couldn't say a word, and then we left. It would be great if there were as many of these happy endings as possible. Happy endings like yours. Thank you for your story. Thank you for being so brave. I know how difficult it must be to talk about it, but it is worth talking about it, and it's important to talk about it publicly because every case like that is yet another reminder and yet another documentation of these crimes. Thank you, Katarina. Miss Irina? Miss Irina resided in Bucha together with her husband when Russian service members entered her yard. Miss Irina, could you share with us what happened next? Good afternoon, everyone. On March 5th, in the morning, my husband and I heard vehicles moving. We have our house split into two parts. My father was residing in the other part of the house, and so we decided to go to my father's half of the house to be together so that it wouldn't be as scary. Just in probably about after 5 minutes after we entered my father's half of the house, we heard this horrible explosion coming from my room, from my half of the house. They threw a grenade at our window, the Russians did. They pushed the gate out and they entered the yard. They started shooting at the house. They ordered us to leave the house with our hands up in the air. We exited the home. There were four of them with the rifles. They were holding the rifles, pointing at us. They've taken away our phones. They told us to open our pockets. They asked us where the Nazis are. The house was on fire. My half of the house, at least. There was black smoke coming out the windows. My husband entered the yard. He wanted to extinguish the fire. I was left there in the yard. One of the Russians started to interrogate me. He wanted to know where the Nazis were. As soon as my husband approached my half of the house, he was ordered to strip naked. He was brought out into the street and he was interrogated out there in the street. And then they put him down on the ground and shot at the back of his head. Right after the shot, I went out into the street and all four of them were sitting across from him. I started to scream. And they just watched me. They were interested to see my reaction. It seemed like they watched me like a play, like a game of some sorts. I started to ask them to kill me too. My husband and I lived together for 17 years. It was always just the two of us. And at that moment, I did not see any meaning to my life anymore. One of the Russians approached me 4 times, maybe. He kept pulling the safety of his rifle. And then my father exited the house. He said, "Old man, is that your daughter? Get her and leave. We will clear the place. There will no one be left alive afterwards. If you do not leave after 3 minutes, we will kill you as well." My father pulled me by force. And he asked me, "Where do we go? The house is on fire. We have nowhere to go." There were many tanks in the street. Near our gate, we saw a woman, Irina Filkina. She was killed already, and her corpse was out there. There were vehicles that were shot at and damaged. And so we went to the adjacent street. We walked without any purpose for a bit because it was very scary. All of the gates were kicked down. There were things scattered around. It seemed to me like every yard had dead people in it. Like there was no one left alive. That's how it felt. We walked and walked, and then my father remembered that we had our acquaintance living there, and we asked them if they would take us in, and we stayed there until the 30th of March. On March 30th, a neighbor ran to us and she told us that Russians were no longer here. We went back to my house, but there was no house. It was destroyed, and my husband, his corpse was right there where we left it. There were many people at the road crossing who were killed. It was really scary. We had a corpse right in our yard, a person that was shot dead. And then Ukrainian troops came. They took Oleg's body to the morgue, and on April 12th we were able to bury him. Miss Irina, could we say that your husband was killed for speaking Ukrainian? Would you say that? Oleg would only speak Ukrainian. Did you hear what they were talking about? The Russians and him? No, I did not. My father told me that he heard Oleg telling them, "What are you doing?" They did not let you to extinguish the fire, did they? No, they did not. They did it on purpose. Was that on purpose? Did they want to make you suffer? Was it possible to extinguish your house and save some of your property? We had nothing left. Nothing survives the fire. The only thing I had my cat because I jumped out the house with my cat in my arms and I totally forgot that I was clenching my cat. And then only later on, only in the evening, the cat started moving and I realized I was holding it. That was the only thing I have left. My cat. Out of all of my family's property. Where are you living now? I live in my aunt's house right now. We live. My cat and I we live in my aunt's house. Our home is being rebuilt right now. It's in the process. We're holding together. We're living somehow, hoping for a victory. Miss Irina, of course, it is impossible to compensate the loss of your husband, but we wish you resilience. First and foremost, we wish you new, better life in a new house. And all of us would want to see every crime like that be brought to justice, every perpetrator be brought to justice. This will not bring your husband back, but it will let justice prevail. Thank you. Thank you for your story. Thank you for your honesty. And thank you for your testimony. Thank you. Also, we have here with us, and thank you for being here, Andrei Holovin, a reverend, a priest of the local church. We saw your church on the pictures. We saw after the occupation, French forensic experts working there because there was a mass burial on the territory of the church. It is due to your effort because you were risking your life. You risked being shot at any point since the very first days of the occupation when you realized that their bodies laying on the street, that the civilians are being murdered. During the evacuation, you started to collect those bodies and bury them in the monastery's yard. You understood that they could very well just come onto the territory of the monastery. We're dealing with people who do not care about religion, about God, about church. But you continued to do that. You continued to bury those people. Could you please share with us how did it start and how did you kept your faith? How did you continue to believe that you could help at least the dead people at that point? Good afternoon.
Я би хотів менше говорити про себе.
I don't really want to talk about myself.
Так сталося, що мені
It just happened
пощастило
that
найбільше.
I was the most lucky.
У мене є будинок, у якого є дах,
I have the
який
house with a roof on it,
росіяни
despite the fact that Russians lived in
знімали.
my house. My neighbors don't have their houses anymore.
Мені пощастило в тому,
I
що
was
я ось
lucky enough to be able to evacuate my family a couple days prior to the beginning of the war, and I knew that they were safe.
Е, під час війни перших отих днів
During the war,
обстрілів
during the very first few days of the shelling,
можуть бути чимось
people who
корисним.
stayed in Bucha were the people who thought they could do something to help
Перше, що
others.
зробили росіяни,
But the
23
first thing that the
лютого,
Russians did on February
це
26
обстріляли храм.
was shell the monastery.
Храм
Even until today, the walls of the monastery contain wounds.
це був прицільний вогонь. Це не
That was deliberate shelling, that was no accident. The monastery is shelled and shot at from all sides.
у храмі було видно.
All of the windows were shattered.
Росіяни вдерлися всередину,
Russians entered the
я
monastery.
не знаю для чого.
I don't know what for.
Сталося так, що на вулицях нашого міста
It just happened so that on the streets of our city there were many corpses. The first thing that the Russians did on February 27th, besides shelling the monasteries, they destroyed the infrastructure. We lost light, we lost water,
відповідно не міг працювати морг.
and the morgue could not function.
Міська влада, не дивлячись, що
The city government, despite all of the shelling,
знищили колони росіян, відновили інфраструктуру.
as soon as the Russians left, were pushed out, the city government tried to restore the infrastructure, but the Russians entered again, and then the infrastructure was destroyed again. And so, throughout the entire period of occupation, there was nothing here but air.
Спалення
The corpses of people were left in the street.
показували, які
The destroyed vehicles and the children that were left at the damaged vehicle, that they were here just less than a kilometer from here. Their corpses were left to rot in the car.
ось
They lived right across from the
дивлячись на те,
monastery.
що окупація була в
And
дії,
despite the
місцева
fact
влада
that the city was occupied, the city
зробила
government
концепцію
was
ведення
trying to find
поховань.
ways to bury these
Тому що
people,
ці
the
люди
residents of
їхали
the
в
city,
живі тварини,
because you understand that there are
починають нищити
animals
земля,
moving around. They
а
start
це не просто
destroying the
тварини, це не
corpses.
просто
And those
маленька
are not
якась
just corpses,
статистика,
those
цифри.
are not
Це для нас,
statistics.
громадян, які
For
тут
us,
мають,
those
наші
are
сусіди,
our
наші
neighbors,
близькі,
our friends, our
батьки,
family
сини,
members,
чиї
somebody's
дочки.
sons, somebody's parents,
Ось
somebody's
10
daughters.
вересня в мене
And so on March
випадково
10th,
зв'язку не було біля
I
міської
had
ради,
actually no signal on my
біля
phone,
міського забуча
but
кладовища місцевого.
I
Там
accidentally
стояв
met
тодішній міський голова.
one of the managers of the local burial site, and he told me that the mayor wants to see me, and he told me that a lot of people need to be buried. The territory of the monastery is not as far from the hospital, and this is the only place where we can bury these people. And so we agreed where the burials would take place, and on March 10th, the first burial took place. There was one trench dug up, and then later on there was another trench.
Ті люди, які могли, які були поруч,
The people that were living next to us could bring
там людей,
the bodies of their family members on their own and bury them on the monastery ground.
116
And so 116 people overall were buried on the monastery ground. There were those two children
було 30
that were killed in the vehicle, their mom, there were 30 women,
наш поліцейський,
there was one policeman
воює при виконанні службових
who was killed on duty, as far as I know,
кілька військових.
and there were a couple of service members. I just want to draw your attention to the fact that those service members were Russians.
Знаючи, що в морзі
Their military command, knowing that their bodies of their service members, of the Russian service members in the morgue, they did not pick them up, and we were forced to bury their corpses.
цих 116
Unfortunately, these 116 people
лише невелика частина
are just a fraction
які були
of all of the people
знищені в Бучі.
that were killed in Bucha.
Бо багато мікрорайонів були
Because many of the city districts were unavailable for us. We could not access them, and we could not bury those people.
один із прикладів
One of the examples that hurts me,
скору
we had a singer from my church choir who sang at my monastery, Andriy Shapilo.
в цьому кварталі, де він жив,
In the district where he lived,
11 людей.
11 people were killed.
Шістьох із них
6 of them were interrogated,
приховати
and clearly to hide the evidence of the crimes, their bodies were dumped in a pile and lit on fire. Out of those 6 people, 4 were the family of Andriy Shapilo.
вони були спалені.
They were burned.
Більше того, їх
Even more so, they were buried as
останки були
unknown individuals because the corpses
ДНК,
were so badly burned that they only needed DNA testing to identify who they were. Only the mother had family, and so they were trying to look for family to conduct DNA testing, but thank God we know now who they are and we know where they are buried. I want to highlight that it's very important for us to find truth.
в цьому світі людина, як два крила, тримає
In this world, a person is held by 2 wings,
бажання жити вічно,
by the desire to live forever
бажання правди і
and by the desire to find truth and justice, and there is no one without the other.
вічне життя,
Because why do we need eternal life if there's no justice?
і для чого справедливість
And why do we need justice
сьогодні є, і через хвилину
if we have it today and then we'll not have it tomorrow?
цих людей забрати життя.
These people had their lives taken away.
І ми благаємо родичів і близьких,
And we, the families and the friends, beg for justice. We beg to have the answer whether those Russian service members who are here, who are they?
хто після жесту доброї волі отримали підвищення,
They are the ones who have been promoted
значить їхні
after this goodwill gesture, and that means that their families, their wives, their families are proud of them.
це
Or is it the opposite? Or are they the rapists? Or are they the murderers?
убивстві,
Or are they the looters, the
армію
murderers,
країни-агресора.
the army of the aggressor
Дуже
state?
важливо отримати цю
It is
відповідь.
very important for us to know what the answer to this
Тому
question is.
що для родичів, близьких вже не вернеш.
Because their
Для них
families will
важливо
never get
знайти
them back.
справедливість.
Now they just need
Якщо вони
justice.
цю справедливість не знайдуть
If they will not find this justice on the
в
tribunal,
міжнародному суді,
in the international court,
як би ми не старалися,
no matter how hard we try,
можемо заборонити їм думати
we
про
will
це.
never be able to stop them from thinking about vengeance. But this is not the way to go. Which is why it is very important for us, even more now when we know that God is a judge
І останнє,
who judges us righteously, and the last thing that will ever take place in this world will be the court, where we all be held accountable for our actions. And it's very important that before all of us are taken to the God's court, we get answers from the human court. What is a crime? And what is good? And what is malice? Thank you.
Дуже дякуємо за ваше велике серце.
Thank you,
за все те,
Reverend
що
Andrew.
ви
Thank you for your big heart. Thank you for everything you have done.
могли би сказати. Скажу це за вас.
You could have said that, but I want to highlight that it's very symbolic that after the occupation, on April 7th, the first Mass was held, and there was a great holiday. And I think that might be very symbolic of our future victory. The last Mass at this monastery was held on the 27th of February during the shelling.
під час окупації не було можливості.
And during the occupation, we did not have an opportunity to hold Mass because Russians would kill everyone. And so the first Mass we were able to hold after the occupation was there with the people who did not leave Bucha, who some of them who lived through multiple occupations, because there were women and men who lived through World War II and through the Nazi occupation. And after hearing them talk, I learned that the Germans, the Nazis, were not as cruel as those people who call us their brothers. Yes, that is true. And on my behalf, I would like to add that we still have people missing in action here in Kiev Oblast. We have people who have been taken hostage, and so we have to work towards liberating them. And I would like to thank Reverend Andriy for hearing his community, for listening to community initiatives, because just according to the data of our community initiative, there were 163 people who are still missing in action in Kiev. 126 of them have been taken hostage by the Russians. Those are just regular civilians who were kidnapped from the streets, from their homes. They are currently held hostage. Some of them have not even had a court ruling. For example, amongst the people with whom we communicate is the mother of Vladislav Popovich. He's a 19-year-old young man from Kiev Oblast. We were able to identify that he has been taken to Russia, to the pre-trial detention cell. He has turned 20, and he's still being held hostage, and we shall not forget about these people. We shall bring them back. Thank you. If I may, I would like to also add, abuse my time here, and I would like to also add that there are instances some of our churchgoers have been taken hostage. There are two sisters, their husbands and sons were taken hostage. On the road, the son panicked, tried to flee. The Russians killed him, and the two husbands are currently in Russia being held hostage. Those who returned from Russia have explained how their son was trying to flee, and according to their stories, they were able to find his grave, but those two husbands are still being held hostage. And I would like to also add that in our district, there is no church, no matter the faith, that was left untouched. Two priests in our district were killed. There was a priest in Irpin who died as a result of the shelling, and there is a priest in Bucha who was deliberately killed by the Russians. Just for you to understand who these people are that came here. That is true. Thank you. Thank you so much for participating, and thank you for joining in the discussion today. Thank you.